Hi, my name is Lisa, and I'm with the Dynamic Self Astrology for Life. And today I'm bringing you an overview of what Donald Trump's chart looks like for this year. He celebrated his 80th birthday yesterday on June 14th, 2026. And as many of you know, whenever any individual or any entity, be that a business or a nation, has their birthday, the sun returns to the place of its natal position. A chart is cast for that next year, and that serves as a predictive tool for us to look ahead and see what this year ahead looks like for the individual or the entity. In this case, we'll be looking primarily at Trump's chart and looking at what this year looks like it has ahead for him. I know that there are many astrologers that I've seen out there that are putting their work out there, a lot of great stuff. And I just wanted to add a little bit of my own nuance because I do solar return charts nearly every day with my clients. If I'm not looking at it for my clients, and I'm usually doing some sort of research, it's a really powerful tool. And I just wanted to bring it forward in looking at what Trump's year ahead looks like. And if you've seen any of my work, I did a presentation last year for the Kepler Uranian Group looking at Trump's astrology for his 2025 year into this year. And I also recently did a presentation that I posted on all of my sites, be that YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Substack, on the war in Iran. And it does cover some of Trump's astrology there, as well as a lot of the United States astrology. So let's jump into this. Before I dive into a solar return chart with any clients, there are basic groundworks that I like to look at. First of all, I always want to understand their natal chart. And in this case, I already have a pretty strong understanding of Trump's natal chart. As I said, you can go back and look at any of my previous work if you'd like any more description of that. And I'm sure that we'll touch on some of his natal astrology as well. One of the things that I really like to look at first before I'm going too far into their solar return chart is what's called their secondary progressed lunar phases. And this is how it looks on Astrogold. And we see that in May of 2023, he entered into his crescent phase, and he's there until June 12th, 2027. And the crescent phase can be a phase where an individual is essentially throwing things at the wall and seeing what will stick. They're coming out of what's called the new moon phase, which he was in from 2019 to 2023. And that may have been a time when he was really rethinking some of the approaches that he had been making in his career that thus far. And 2016 to 2019, even though it was in 2016 when he was elected president, he may have not have felt as though he really had the control that he wanted over the White House. And he may have felt as though he didn't have the orientation that he needed to get the job done that he wanted to have done. Whether we agree with that or not, that balsamic phase can actually be quite difficult. And I think when we compare his first time in office to his present time in office, we can see that there's a really big difference in the type of approach that he's taking to how he's running the country. The first time he was feeling maybe a little bit sheepish, as though he didn't have all of the tools that he needed. And 2019 to 2023, even though he was still technically in office, may have been gestating on how he would do this differently. And he's currently at a time where he is being more aggressive because he knows which way he's oriented and he's really just taking chances. That's what that crescent phase is. I like to liken it to Uranus in a lot of ways. It's time to just put yourself out there and do things that might seem out of sorts or might be a little bit risky, but that's really what this crescent phase is about. And whether we like the results of what that is or not, it doesn't matter. Astrology doesn't have political preferences. It just tells the story of each individual. And in June 2027, so a year from now, he's going to reach his first quarter phase, which is going to maybe give him some checks and balances, let him know the things that maybe weren't working in how he was approaching this crescent phase. And some of this might materialize into having to maybe calm things down or rein things in order to set the Republican Party up for the presidential elections that will be arriving a year from there. So that's real quick, kind of where we're at as far as what his underlying approach to life is like at this time. And then I also wanted to bring up, because I think that it's really important this year, specifically for Trump, his annual perfections. This year, he's Mars ruled, and it's in Aries, which from a whole sign perspective is in his ninth house. And this is telling us that this is a time where he's being a little bit more aggressive, inflammation, and that sort of thing could be highlighted. But also topics of the ninth house, which Mars rules, and Aries is in of the courts, of law, of legal events, as well as foreign entities. And then for him also, this Mars also rules his fourth house of family, which comes up quite a bit in his solar return chart as well. So I'm looking to that a bit more. And then also his natal Mars is conjunct his ascendant, which makes his physical body more prominent, which some people are saying this could bring up health issues. I'm not so sure that that's really the way that this is going to orient itself, but it does look like there's definitely going to be a lot more aggression, and he may feel as though he's fighting for his independence in some ways, or fighting for his voice, or fighting for his goals to be reached, is more how I read that. All right. So now that we have a basic overview of what we're seeing from these larger themes in his life right now, and looking at the secondary progressed lunar phases and the perfections, we'll take a look at his solar return chart. And we will return back to this Mars. I do want to say that the perfected Mars year, I think it shows up in several different ways. First of all, Mars is a really important planet in Trump's chart. And if you've watched any of my recent videos, most recent, the war in Iran, you'll see how this Mars placement is really one that has been noticeably triggering over and over again throughout the years, specifically in the war in Iran, in that his Mars is at the same degree as Netanyahu's Mars and very, very close to Israel's Mars. And is opposite to the United States moon. So there's a lot embedded in that Mars placement. And we're going to have a lot of activity on top of that Mars placement as well. We're going to see that triggered by Jupiter coming through towards the end of 2026. And then we'll also have Mars stationing retrograde and passing over Trump's natal Mars several times from the end of 2026 through early 2027, which could impact his health. But I really see this as being more of an inflammation, more aggression, as I stated before. This is a really heavy placement, and as I'm recording this in June 15th, 2026, I did want to say that transiting Mars is again approaching his natal MC and will then square his natal Mars and ascendant, which has consistently been a really intense time for him. And if he was working with an astrologer, this is definitely something that I would be paying attention to, making sure that he had extra security around him. The dates for this specifically are the 20th to the 24th of June. And this could also signal heightened tensions with Iran, maybe even in his alliance with Israel as well. At this time, there has been statements of peace, written statements of peace with Iran, But I'm wondering if some part of this is going to fall apart, possibly because Netanyahu is going to want to continue his attacks on Hamas and Lebanon. When I looked at the composite chart for Trump and Netanyahu, there's a really strong intensity in their chart towards leadership and being able to be bulldozers in the world and really powerful men. However, there's also a statement in their chart that says that there's a lack of trust between the two of them in ways that they tend to deceive one another. And while Trump's placement in his chart in general has a very bulldozer type approach to it, whose has a more stealth-like alignment to it, where he's working behind the scenes and he's not going to miss. He is Mars widely conjunct Pluto, stating that he's willing to wait for the right punch. And he's also not going to let up once he gets his hands on what he wants. And I'm really skeptical that that relationship is going to go well in the long term. And once we get into the solar return chart, I'll point to the areas where I think that that's really showing up. Okay, so let's jump into this chart. The way that I look at solar return charts is I do look at the solar return chart on its own, but I also embed it into the natal chart because these auxiliary charts, such as solar return charts, they don't exist outside of the solar return chart. They're a product of the natal chart. So they don't exist unless the natal chart exists. And to give you an idea widely of how I tend to work with these is I first look at where the solar return ascendant is landing in the natal chart. Then I look at the alignment of the solar return ascendant within the solar return chart. Then I look at the solar return L1 in the context of the natal chart. And then I look at the solar return L1 in the solar return chart. And looking at these four placements gives me the main themes for this year. And then you can continue throughout the houses and do this same process between the two charts. But for the sake of this presentation, I really wanted to just lay out what is coming up for him. So when we look at the solar return ascendant, we find that it lands in his natal fourth house. And this tells us that there's a focus for him on homeland, on his country, on family, maybe real estate. We also know that he's remodeling the White House. So there's a focus on, like I said, home and country, but also family. We already know that for him, home and family is very important. He carries the family name, and the ruler of the fourth house of home and family is conjunct his ascendant with being ruled by this Mars. And we've already pointed to this Mars. We already know that this Mars is being triggered over and over again, and that there are themes pertaining to home and family that's going to be really heightened. And this solar return ascendant in the fourth house is saying very strongly that this is going to be a focus for him. And when we look at what is aspecting that ascendant within the natal chart, there is a semi-square from Jupiter, which is co-ruler of the fourth house and also the eighth house ruler. And we'll get to this in a second, but I wanted to point this out because the eighth house is really highlighted in the solar return chart as well. So this is an important house in the solar return chart. And so we know that topics of shared resources, financial and political entanglements with others are very highlighted at this time, as well as struggling with mortality. And when we have the eighth house emphasized, it can be a time when we're thinking about how much time we have on this earth and could potentially be dealing with health issues. And I'll point out in different ways where I see that being something that is potentially highlighted for Trump this year as we move forward. And moving back over to the solar return chart, I'm speaking to how the eighth house is highlighted. We'll just jump into that real quickly in that we find the most prominent cluster of planets in the solar return chart in the eighth house. And when you see that, you want to ask why, correct? Like, why is this happening? Why do we have this focus on the eighth house? Does this have to do with shared resources with other people? Does this have to do with Melania and his relationship with her? Does this have to do with his business partnerships? And I think in order to understand the eighth house, oftentimes it's good to also take a look at the seventh house because they're often working together. And also, we know that the ruler of the seventh house, this Mercury, is in the eighth house. The ruler of the first house, Trump, is in this eighth house as well. And so there's a lot going on here in this eighth house. But when we look at the seventh house, we see that the ruler of the eighth house is also conjunct this ascendant. So we have a lot of overlapping seventh and eighth house themes occurring. So, yes, it could be mortality. Yes, it could be themes of him struggling with his health, potentially having a surgery or something like that. But it really looks like he is intertwined into his relationships with his partnerships with other people, is causing him a lot of stress and anxiety. The eighth house is the house of stress and anxiety, but we also see that emphasized in that Uranus is conjunct the descendant and also conjunct this moon, which, as I said, is the ruler of the eighth house, but also is the universal significator of family. So that brings us back to that family topic as well. And we're understanding that there is an overlap of themes. There's something about home, family, nation, and homeland, as well as his partnerships. Most likely, I suspect this could have to do with his business relationships. And we'll get into that in a bit in just a moment. But it does look as though there's a lot of volatility and inconsistency when it comes to how he is embedded in his partnership. So, what he owes other people, what they owe him, he's not really able to work as the independent agent that he's used to acting as. And we know that because of this Mars. And we know that this Mars is going to be triggered this year and throughout this solar return year, specifically when Mars comes to retrograde over his ascendant and Mars, there's going to be a lot of reaction from him. He's going to be very triggered and potentially angry and acting maybe out of his best interest at times and putting him in a place where he feels as though he does not have the control that he would like to have. And there's something about his family that's also getting tied into the story as well. And we see this reiterated in this chart as well because the ruler of Trump is also the ruler of his fourth house of home and family. And we have Neptune down here. In fact, we have a wide Saturn-Neptune conjunction, although we'd probably put the Saturn into the fifth house, and that's something that we're just not getting into in this chart. So that this is a basic outline of where that is at. And the next placement that we want to look at is solar return L1 to the natal. And we find that this Jupiter in Cancer at 26 degrees is in his 11th house. The 11th house, where it looks like he's doing everything he can to gain support from his base, potentially to win the primaries and just to rally up that support because, as many of us know, he's been having some pretty tough polls as far as his popularity goes. People aren't backing him very much because of the war, because of the economy. So the economy could even have to do with this eighth house in that there's debt that he's worrying about. Of course, we'd probably look at that more closely when we look at the US chart, but there's financial entanglements and political entanglements that he's worried about that's impacting how he connects with his base. And we know that this Venus Saturn in his chart, this Venus rules his 10th house most importantly. And he is oriented towards supporting his career by promoting his message and connecting with the people. And that's a big part of where he's really oriented within this year as well. And the Saturn, interestingly, is ruler of the fifth, sixth, and seventh house for him. And while this can definitely bring up themes of illness, another placement that says that he doesn't have the control that he normally would, he's just feeling overwhelmed and wiped out. But also, there's a partnership element to it. And we already know that this partnership is probably a little bit more prominent as far as the themes that this Saturn is probably pulling out, just because of what we looked at over here with the eighth and seventh house placements being so loud in the solar return chart. We can probably safely say that this Saturn is reflecting his partnerships and how his partnerships are impacting his work, his career. There could be events with millennia, as I said, that he's forced to reckon with. And this could be part of the Epstein files. We could find that they're being released a bit more in this coming solar return year for him. And then Saturn, being Saturn just on its own, is stating that there's great hurdles that he's dealing with. And the main significators here, Jupiter and Mercury, which are ruling the angles most importantly in this chart, are both conjunct this Venus Saturn conjunction in his chart. So this is really being triggered. This is part of his natal's promise that is being exposed here, that's being reckoned with, where he's working extremely hard in order to gain the success that he wants, but can he get there? In general, this has been a part of his chart that's given him problems as far as his history with women. When we bring the TMPs up, Hades is very, very closely aligned with this Venus Saturn conjunction, stating that he doesn't always make the best choices. He's a bit of a slimy guy when it comes to relationships and women. And that makes me wonder if this Mercury and Venus triggering this part, if this is going to be something that's being exposed that brings legal disputes, which could be part of this Mars as well. And also could be part of why he's working so hard to bring more support from his base and not lose that support. And then the final placement, as far as the main placements that we look at, is the solar return L1 in the solar return chart. And as we've pointed to before, that's Jupiter, it's in the eighth house. And we know that, again, he's not able to act freely. There's anxiety associated with this. He is being thrown volatile situations and possibly even contributing to volatile situations. There's a lack of comfort for him this year. Last year, things were just kind of rolling for him. There was really nothing inhibiting him. But this year, we see that there's definitely more being thrown at him that's making him less in control. Although out of sign, I would take this conjunction of Jupiter with Venus, and Venus being L6 and L11, which again could be health. It's the eighth house, so maybe he's getting worn down. He is 80 years old. This is his second term in office. He works his butt off, whether we want him to or not. But we could definitely see that he's being forced to reckon with his health in a way that maybe he's been able to push off before. But it but this Venus also rules his 11th house, which I think is more of a stronger statement in that we already have so many things falling into this 11th house in his natal chart that having this 11th house highlighted in his solar return chart makes sense in that he is doing his best to reconcile his legacy with the public and gain support. Those are the main things. I guess when I look at his career, again, we're continually pointed back towards this eighth house, 11th house connection here. So I would say if I were consulting with Trump this year, I would make sure that he takes care of his health, but also really emphasize for him whenever we have these angular planets in a solar return chart, we know they're going to be very loud. We know that they are the main act and that the rest of the chart has to contend with them this year. Moon Uranus can also be health. It can be just his physical health. It can also be women in his life. So, like I said, this could be things coming up with Melania. We also know that moon rules the eighth house. This could be investments that he makes. It looks like last year he did really well with investments, and that was all on the up and up. But here we see that both his career and him are so tied into deals that he's made with others, such as Netanyahu, maybe those in his cabinet, maybe that's JD Vance or others who he's doing business deals with, that he isn't able to have his own autonomy. I will say that if we're just looking at this as universal significators, that Venus Jupiter in the eighth house is actually not a bad placement on its own. It could state that even though it's highlighted in partnership, it makes you wonder if there is the possibility of his wealth growing as well. And maybe this Uranus could be something where, even though there's volatility in his partnerships, that those partnerships could possibly bring more money for him personally. And maybe that karmic embeddedness with these partners is something that could potentially benefit him in the long run. I say that mostly because this is so aligned in an arguably powerful way to his natal chart, and that it's visible and that it has access to the outside world. It's gaining visibility and it's connected to his career, which is in a politician's chart, in a president's chart, in anybody's chart who's really working to accomplish things in their career. These are the kinds of placements that you want for the most part. The eighth house, not so much, but it does correlate well with the 11th house. So while there are definitely more challenges for Trump this year, I would say that we may see him struggle more. We may see that he has some really notable fallouts or partnerships with leaders. As I said, Netanyahu, which is who I really focused on in the Iran presentation, but it could be all sorts of partners. In a world such as Trump's, this seventh house business partnership is very highlighted. And there's just a lot of people who that could land on. That's what we've got. I hope that you've got something important and meaningful out of this. If you ever have any questions about how I do my work, please reach out and let me know. And I'll be sharing more in the coming months. Bye, everybody. Take care.